Bluesaf, they can wear an elite. Sales and Soga and himself half. Blood and Blesser and Eikberger Jenikt. Wēsaþ hale and bēoþ wilcuman. Welcome back to part 2 of this episode about the Anglo-Saxon rune Wen. Now, this was actually meant to be part of part 1. This wasn't meant to be an episode on its own at all, but it appears that I could talk for England. Ich spreche from Englolande. So here we are with a separate episode. Now, before I begin, I would like to say thank you for watching, thank you for being here. Especially thank you to my subscribers. I really appreciate that. If you don't already subscribe to this channel, please do so. And likes are very much appreciated, as are comments. Now, please share this video around so that we can get it out there. I am on a mission to prove that the heathen Anglo-Saxons were every bit as cool and amazing as the Vikings, who, let's face it, have got the main stage at the moment. But the Anglo-Saxons have such a rich and interesting heritage, and my aim is to bring that alive and to try to reconnect with that spirituality. So please do like and subscribe to this channel. I really appreciate it. If you want to support me further, I do have a Patreon and details are below. So, as I said, this wasn't even meant to be an episode on its own. This was meant to be part of part 1. But it turned out that I had a lot more to say about this than I thought I did. So here we are with an episode on its own. So in this episode, we're going to be in the Mead Hall, as you probably guessed. Not out in a wood, we're in the Mead Hall. And we're talking about the joys of the hall. And you know I love my Mead Hall, and today we're going to be talking about how the Anglo-Saxons would have enjoyed that experience, and how they would have done, and how they would have viewed it. So, pull up a chair, pull up a bench, huddle round the fire, and yeah, come and join me for this episode about the hall joy. Welcome to my Mead Hall. Ye sind wilcuman. Indeed, no episode about the Anglo-Saxons' happiness would be complete without a visit to the Mead Hall. So here we're going to be speaking about the joys of the hall, or as the Anglo-Saxons would say, seledrēam. Hall joy. They actually had a word for it. So to the Anglo-Saxons, being within the safe confines of the hall, sharing the companionship and the pleasure of company with your kith and kin, and of course if you were one of the warrior elite, with your lord and your fellow retainers, then this was indeed the good life. it didn't really get much better than this. So these were the kind of joys that were not available to the outcast or the exile. These pleasures were reserved for those who were part of the community, part of the close-knit community that existed in Anglo-Saxon society. And let's face it, if we're being honest, they were mainly reserved for men as well. I'm bucking the trend here by being a woman in the Mead Hall. They were generally places for the males in the society. So to get a flavour of what we're looking at here, I'm going to turn to Beowulf, as I like to, and I'm going to read you a passage from that epic poem. I'll read it to you in Old English first, and then we'll hear it in modern English. This is lines 1159 to 1165. Leofwas a sunyan, gleomanas gid, garmen f asta, beotoda benchway, birla seldon winon wundervatum, tha quam welfio forth, garn under gildum bear, fair for Gordon twain, Saturn sutta faderlan, tha yit was hele sib at gedela, ag wilch offram truwa. Okay, so that was the Old English. Now let's hear it in modern English, shall we? The lay was finished, the gleeman's song, then glad rose the revel, bench joy brightened, bearers draw from their wonder vats wine. Comes Wēsaþ forth, under gold crown, goes where the good pair sit, uncle and nephew, true each to the other one, kindred in amity. So that short passage from Beowulf gives us the feel for the Anglo-Saxon concept of seledrēam, the hall joy. Now, this part of the poem actually comes directly after a shop, which is the Anglo-Saxon version of a poet or a bard, or, you know, the Old English equivalent of a skald. It comes directly after this shop has performed for the gathered comrades and actually told them the epic tale of Finn of the Frisians and Hanaf and Hengest, a very dramatic, heroic tale with much bloodshed. Maybe we'll talk about that another day. But so shops, they would have provided entertainment within the hall, and, you know, they would have regaled the bench comrades with tales of valour and, you know, heroic deeds, stories that would have entranced and enthralled them. You know, the gathered crowd would have hung on the shop's every word. You know, these were the kind of tales that would have been told within the pagan mead halls of old. Now, of course, we know very little. It's impossible with an oral tradition. It's impossible to know very much at all about the kind of tales that would have been told to the lords and the retainers within the hall. But you know, we can only speculate, but it does seem very likely that, just as happened in the Beowulf poem when they heard the story of Finn of the Frisians, that they would have been told heroic tales, tales of their ancestors, maybe tales of the gods. Who knows? Gods, heroes. These are the kind of tales that I can imagine would have been told within the mead halls of long ago. Now, there is something which gives me a very good indication that these tales of heroes and ancestors were so ingrained within the Germanic psyche that they continue to be told within the walls of the hall beyond the Christian conversion. In a letter dated 797, the Northumbrian poet, clergyman, cleric, he was forced to ask the question, quid hineldus cum Christo? What has Ingeld to do with Christ? Indeed, nothing. Now, Ingeld was a legendary Germanic warrior, one of the ancestors, so it seems very likely that Christianity was basically unable to stub out the Anglo-Saxons' love of Germanic heroic tales. The fact that beyond beyond the times of the Christian conversion, these tales were still being told gives us a very strong indication that these would have been the kind of tales that were told in the pagan Mead Halls. Now, let's look at other types of entertainment that might have happened. We're talking about fun here, we're talking about entertainment, we're talking about, seledrēam, hall joy. Now, dancing, who doesn't like a good dance? I love a good dance. And the Anglo-Saxons, they loved a good dance as much as we do. Now we have a verb, chlipan, ich chlipa, which is dancing. Obviously leap, that's where our modern word comes from. And then we have a more skilled type of dancing, maybe something more akin to acrobatics, gymnastics, which is the verb tombian, ich tombia. So let's look now back to Tacitus. You know I like to look back at Tacitus and see what he tells us about the pre-migration period Germanic tribes who were living on the continent. So he tells us they have only one kind of public show, which is performed without variation at every festive gathering. Naked youths, trained in the sport, dance about among swords and spears levelled at them. Practice begets skill, and skill grace, but they are not professionals and do not receive payment. Their most daring flings have their only reward in the pleasure they may give the spectators. Now, wouldn't that be a thing to see? They play at dice, surprisingly enough, when they are sober, making a serious business of it, and they are so reckless in their anxiety to win, however, often they lose, that when everything else is gone, they will stake their personal liberty on a last decisive throw. A loser willingly discharges his debt by becoming a slave, even though he may be the younger and stronger man. He allows himself to be bound and sold by the winner. Such is their stubborn persistence in a vicious practice, though they call it honour. Slaves of this description are disposed of by the way of trade, since even their owners want to escape the shame of such a victory. So we will actually be talking about slavery in a later part of this episode, so just hold that thought there. But this was Tacitus talking about the around AD 98, I believe, the Germanic tribes on the continent. So whether or not such displays of skill and dancing happened with the post-migration Germanic people in this country, we don't know. We can only speculate, but it would seem fair to assume that they continued gambling and gaming, but it's really hard to know, but we can assume. So here I am in my Mead Hall with my rather fancy glass beads and my nicely dyed peplos, dressed as a higher class person. But such gatherings for ale drinking and making merry, they weren't just reserved for the rich people. These kind of practices happened throughout all tiers of society, although no doubt the quality of the ale and of the food and probably of the entertainment would have gone down, the lower you went through the ranks. Now, in my episode, I spoke about the ritualized drinking ritual known as the sumbul, and I'll put a link to that episode below. But in that episode I spoke about how that ritual, which did involve drinking within the hall, was very much linked to making oaths and boasts. So it would appear that the Anglo-Saxons had two different types of drinking gathering of drinkers, whatever you want to call it. There was the sumbul that I've spoken about previously, which was very ritualized, but there was also a more informal gathering. I suppose you could liken it to our current day going down the pub with your mates kind of gathering, and that was called a bēoþ. Now, if we look that word up in the Bosworth Toller Dictionary, as indeed I like to do quite often, it's definitely set to my favourites, that translates literally as beer ship. What's a beer ship? I don't know, but I want to go for a sail on it. But in more understandable terms, it means convivial society, a drinking party, a feast, or an entertainment. I suppose in the way that we have friendship, the Anglo-Saxons had beership. So the bēoþ was something which would have happened throughout all tiers of society, not just the rich folk. There's actually mention of one of these in the Caedmon story, but it does crop up in other stories too, and these tend to involve ordinary, everyday folk. So as I said, probably the closest we can get to it nowadays is to liken it to going to the pub, gathering with friends, drinking, chatting, enjoying their company. It was a chance to gather with your kith and your kin for drinking, talking, merrymaking. And it didn't have any of the formalities that are associated with the sumbul. But from the Caedmon story, we do discover something rather interesting, and that is that they probably didn't have an official entertainer, a shop. They all had to basically make their own entertainment. So everybody that was gathered at this bēoþ was basically expected to provide some entertainment, to play their part, to maybe sing or play an instrument or dance. And that was the entertainment. They made their own entertainment. They didn't have jukeboxes or fruit machines like we do nowadays, and they had to create that for themselves. It goes without saying that a trip to the Mead Hall or a bēoþ would involve the drinking of alcohol. It's something the English seem to be particularly good at. So let's ask the question, what did the Anglo-Saxons drink? Now, I've actually made a video all about this where I brewed my own ale, Anglo-Saxon style, and again I'll put a link to that under this video. But they would have drunk a range of different drinks. So ale, or ilu, that was kind of like the everyday drink. It wouldn't have had a very long shelf life. It would have been extremely weak. Everybody probably would have brewed it in their houses. It would have been one of the jobs of the housewife to brew beer. Probably would have had like a continual production line going. Would have been flavoured with different gruits. On my first batch I used elderflower. It depends what was in season. The batch I've just brewed, which I actually have a glass of here. It's rather nice actually. Now I made this with rye. When they were on the continent, the Germanic tribes did use a lot of rye, and they continued to use it when they came across the North Sea and settled in this country. In fact, I spoke about this in my ale video. They found quite a large malting complex at Sedgeford in North Norfolk where they were malting rye, and that's what's given it this lovely dark colour. And yeah, I put mugwort in this, which was one of the traditional herbs that the Anglo-Saxons used to flavour their ale. I'm just going to have a sip now. I have to say that is really good. It's completely different to, you know, the ale that you buy in shops, but you know, that is how the Anglo-Saxons made their ale. So, you know, they would have drunk that as, you know, men, women, children. It was safer to drink than the water, so that would have been like their everyday drink. Now, bēoþ, which is obviously translated into modern as beer. Now that wasn't at all like modern day beer. When you think of beer, that isn't what it was like. It was brewed with honey and fruit juice and would have been really sweet and inebriating. The alcohol content would have been around 18%, and they would have probably drunk it in tiny little glasses, you know, the kind of stuff that really knocks your socks off. Wine, they had wine, win, and that would have been weaker in strength than the bēoþ, the beer. And of course, you've probably all heard of mead, Meadhall. Now that would have been weaker than both beer, bēoþ, and wine, win, and at around 10%, so not the kind of stuff that you buy nowadays. It would have been much weaker in those days. So one can assume that with all of this drinking, with all of this Meadhall and bēoþ and ilu and win, there probably would have been quite a bit of drunkenness within the hall. But we know that drunkenness wasn't really, you know, it wasn't the thing you wanted to be doing. And if we look to the Norse culture, their cousins of the north, to the Havamal, we see that there are various stanzas telling us about the ills of being drunk. Here's one telling us about the dangers of drunkenness. Drunk was I then, I was over drunk. We've all been there, haven't we? In that crafty Jotun's court. But best is an ale feast when man is able to call back his wits at once. I couldn't agree more. And I have to say, as I've become older, I have become more sensible on the whole. But, you know, I'm sure most of you know what this stanza is talking about. So inebriation was probably sometimes quite inevitable in these beer halls. You know, if the common people were sat around drinking their very weak ilu, then they were probably fine. But if the elite warriors were in the beer hall, the beer cell, drinking the bēoþ, the very, very strong beer, then, you know, they probably would have got quite drunk. Now, the Anglo-Saxons actually had words for this, so we have to assume it did happen if they actually had words for it. There is actually a verb for being drunk, which is drunkian. Ich swife drunknia. That's I was very drunk. We have the word drunken which means drunk, but it actually translates as drunk eager. Now I love this one. This one is just perfect. It's heof swimmer, head swimming. Doesn't that just describe it perfectly? So these were the words that exist within the Old English vocabulary, which do give us a very strong hint that this was probably a problem in the old mead halls. Now, within these settings and on these occasions where people would have gathered together to make merry, music is, I love music. I always think I could not live without music. Music just, not all music, but certain music just makes me happy. It's something which we humans love. And it would have been no different for the Anglo-Saxons. You know, they would have enjoyed music within these gatherings, within these settings. Now, what kind of music did the Anglo-Saxons have? Well, the main instruments, which would have been known as a harp, which we now call a lyre, Now I've got one here, a replica, because I'm a lucky girl. I actually treated myself to this when I got to 1,000 subscribers, and if you can see, it's a beautiful instrument. It's a replica of, I think it's a replica of the one found at Sutton Hoo. It's terribly out of tune at the moment. Ooh, isn't that awful? I couldn't find my tuner before I started this video, so I won't play it for you. But you know, the music, somebody who had it in tune and can play a lot better than I can would have been playing this within the great halls of yesteryear. It is a rather beautiful instrument, so I'll just pop that back there carefully. There we go. But the earliest, well, we call them lyres, but the Anglo-Saxon called them harps, was actually found at Abingdon in Oxfordshire. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't much of it left. It was just the lyre bow fragments and the top of the instrument that were found. But it was buried with the body of a teenage boy. Which, you know, this would have been a high class object. You know, not everybody would have owned one of those beauties, so we can assume that this boy was from a high class family, and that one was made around 400 to 499 AD, so that's the earliest example that's been found in England. So there's been a number of these beautiful instruments found in archaeological digs, both in this country and on the continent. Now, I've got a little list here. So to date in England, there have been 8 of these instruments found, which date from the 5th to the 10th centuries, and in fact many of the earliest examples have actually been found in England. So as I said, the Abingdon one was 5th century. We've got one from the 6th to the 7th century found at Prittlewell, the princely burial at Prittlewell. What else have we got? 620 to 640 AD at Taplow. The one found at Sutton Hoo, which I believe mine is a sort of a replica of, that is actually 7th century. So yeah, there's been a good number of found, and it looks like they would have used these instruments for, you know, several hundred years. If you think the earliest one that's been found is 5th century, and the latest one that was found in Oslo in Norway was actually mid 13th century. So this would have been the preferred instrument for several hundred years. So this would have, you know, this would have provided good entertainment with the harp, with the shop, with the ale, with your comrades, with your friends, with your family, all within the safe confines of the Mead Hall. This was joy for the Anglo-Saxons. This was safety, this was happiness, and dare say, you know, the drinking of alcohol would have made things that much more entertaining. So it, you know, rolled all of those things together, and, you know, we have the archetypal Anglo-Saxon joy. I mean, I know that my Mead Hall is just a pretend one. It's just a mock-up, but I still love it, and I still love coming here, and it still gives me seledrēam hall joy, so we can't complain. So I have gone on quite long enough about Anglo-Saxon joy. I'm going to finish here. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. As I said, you know, I'm on a mission to show that the Anglo-Saxons were every bit as amazing and cool and interesting and spiritual as the Vikings, who tend to take, you know, the main centre stage at the moment. But, you know, the Anglo-Saxons, there's so much interest in that culture, and I just want to be able to share that with you. So thank you. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. I would really appreciate that. Please hit the like button, you know, comment, you know, share it around. Let's get it out there. You know, it's great to hear your comments, so thank you so much. I really do appreciate your support. I do have a Patreon if you would like to support me further, and the details are below. And now I will be back. I've actually got quite a bit to say about this rune, and I will be back for part 2 of this episode about the Anglo-Saxon Rune Wen, where we're going to be getting a little bit saucy. So yeah, come back and see part 2. So for now, all I have to say is bēoþ well and bēoþ hale. Hale.